तिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। श्रीचैतन्यमनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूपः कदा मह्यं ददाति स्वपदान्तिकम्। वन्देऽहं श्रीगुरो श्रीयुतापदकमलं श्रीगुरोन् वैष्णवांश्च श्रीरूपं साग्रजातं सहगणा रघुनाथान्वितं तं सजीवम् साद्वैतं सावधूतं परिजनसहितं कृष्णचैतन्यदेवं श्रीराधा कृष्णपदान् सहगणा ललिता श्रीविशाखान्वितांश्च नमो विष्णुपदाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्तस्वामिनिति नामिने। नमस्ते सारस्वते देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेषशून्यवादी पाश्चात्यदेशकारिणे नमो महावदन्याय कृष्णप्रेमप्रदायते कृष्णाय कृष्णचैतन्य नामिने गौतश्रीमने हे कृष्णा करुणा सिन्धो दीनबन्धो जगत्पते गोपेशा गोपिकान्ता राधाकान्ता तप्तकाञ्चन गौराङ्गी राधिवृन्दावनेश्वरी विश्वभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये। मञ्चकल्पतरुर्भ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्यैव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद हरे कृष्ण 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे. Let's start a new chapter today, chapter 3. Only he could lead them. San Francisco, January 16, 1967. When the announcement for United Airlines Flight 21 from New York came over the public address system, the group of about 50 hippies gathered close together in anticipation. For a moment, they appeared almost apprehensive, unsure of what to expect or what the Swami would be like. Roger Sagal. We were quite an assorted lot, even for the San Francisco airport. Mukunda was wearing a Merlin the Magician robe with paisley squares all around. Sam was wearing a Moroccan sheep robe to the hood. He even smelled like a sheep. And I was wearing a sort of blue homemade Japanese samurai robe with small white dots. Long strings of beads were everywhere. Buckskins and boots, army fatigues, people wearing small, round sunglasses. The whole phantasmagoria of San Francisco had its height. Only a few people in the crowd knew Swamiji. Mukunda and his wife Janaki, Ravindra Swarup, Rayaram, all from New York. And Allen Ginsberg was there a few days before. Allen had been one of the leaders of the Human Bee in Golden Gate Park, where over 200,000 had come together, a gathering of the tribes for a joyful powwow and peace dance. Swamiji would be pleased, Mukunda reminded everyone, if they were all chanting Hare Krishna when he came through the gate. They were already familiar with the Hare Krishna mantra. They had heard about the Swami chanting in the park in New York, or they had seen the article about Swamiji and the chanting in the local underground paper, The Oracle. Earlier today, they had gathered in Golden Gate Park, most of them responding to a flyer Mukunda had distributed, and had chanted there for more than an hour before coming to the airport in a caravan of cars. Now, many of them, also in response to Mukunda's flyer, stood with incense and flowers in their hands. As the disembarking passengers entered the terminal gate and walked up the ramp, they looked in amazement at the reception party of flower-bearing chanters. The chanters, however, gazed past these ordinary, tired-looking travelers, searching for that special person who was supposed to be on the plane. Suddenly, walking toward them was Swamiji, golden complexioned, dressed in bright saffron robes. He had heard the chanting even before he had entered the terminal, and he had begun to smile. He was happy and surprised. Glancing over the faces, he recognized only a few. Yet here were 50 people receiving him and chanting Hare Krishna without his having a word. The crowd of hippies had formed a line on either side of a narrow passage through which Swamiji would walk. As he passed among his new admirers, dozens of hands stretched out to offer him flowers and incense. He smiled, collecting the offerings in his hands while Ranachor would bow. Allen Ginsberg stepped forward with a large bouquet of flowers, and Bhaktivedanta Swami graciously accepted it. Then he began offering the gifts back to all who reached out to receive them. He proceeded through the terminal, the crowd of young people walking beside, chanting. At the baggage claim, he waited for a moment, his eyes taking in everything around him. Lifting his open palms, he beckoned everyone to chant louder, and the group burst into renewed chant, with the Swami standing in their midst, softly clapping his hands and singing Hare Krishna. Gracefully, he then raised his arms above his head and began to dance, stepping and swaying from side to side. To the mixed chagrin, amusement, and irresistible joy of the airport workers and passengers, the reception party stayed with the Swami until he got his luggage. Then they escorted him outside into the sunlight and into a waiting car, a black 1949 Cadillac Fleetwood. Swamiji got into the back seat with Mukunda and Ginsberg until the moment the car pulled away from the curb. Swamiji, still smiling, continued handing flowers to all those who had come to welcome him as he brought Krishna consciousness west. Yes, Lalita Krishna Kokumadashi.
Hare Krishna, Dhananam Prabhuji. The Cadillac belonged to Harvey Cohen, who almost a year before had allowed the Swami to stay in his Bowie loft. Harvey was driving, but because of his curfews had picked up at a Salvation Army store and his black suit and his beard, Swamiji didn't recognize him. Where is Harvey? He's driving, Mukunda said. Oh, is that you? I didn't recognize you. Harvey smiled. Welcome to San Francisco, Swamiji. Bhaktivedanta Swami was happy to be in another big Western city on behalf of his spiritual master, Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati, and Lord Chaitanya. The further west one goes, Lord Chaitanya has said, the more materialistic the people. Yet, Lord Chaitanya had also said that Krishna consciousness shall spread all over the world. Swamiji's God brothers had often wondered about Lord Chaitanya's statement that one day the name of Krishna will be sung in every town and village. Perhaps that verse should be taken symbolically, they said. Otherwise, what could it mean? Krishna in every town? But Bhaktivedanta Swami had defense in that statement by Lord Chaitanya and in the instruction of his spiritual master. Here, he was in the far western city of San Francisco, and already people were chanting. They had enthusiastically received him with flowers and kirtan. And all over the world, there were other cities much like this one. The temple Mukunda and his friends had obtained was on Frederick Street in the Hyatt Shrewsbury district, like the temple at 26th Avenue in New York. It was a small storefront with a display window facing the street. A sign over the window read, Sri Sri Radha Krishna Temple. Mukunda and his friends had also rented a three-room apartment for Swamiji on the third floor of the adjoining building. It was a small, bare, rundown apartment facing the street, followed by several carloads of devotees and curious seekers. Swamiji arrived at 518 Frederick Street and entered the storefront, which was decorated only by a few mother's clothes on the wall. Taking his seat on a cushion, he laid a curtain and then spoke, inviting everyone to take up Krishna consciousness. After his lecture, he left the storefront and walked next door and up the 2 flights of stairs to his apartment. And he entered his apartment, number 132. He was followed not only by his devotees and admirers, but also by reporters from San Francisco's main newspaper, the Chronicle and the Examiner, while some devotees cooked his lunch and Rana Kola unpacked his suitcase. Swamiji talked with the reporters who sat on the floor, taking notes on their pads. Reporters say, downstairs, you said you were inviting everyone to Krishna consciousness. Does that include the height chivalry, bohemians, and beatniks? Swamiji.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Pranam Guruji. Swamiji, yes, everyone, including you or anybody else, be he or she, what is called an acid head or a hippie or something else. But once he is accepted for training, he becomes something else from what he had been before, reported. What does one have to do to become a member of your movement? Swamiji, there are 4 prerequisites. I don't allow my students to keep girlfriends. I prohibit all kind of intoxicants, including coffee, tea, and cigarettes. I prohibit meat eating, and I prohibit my students from taking part in gambling. Reporter, do these shall not commandment extend to use of LSD, marijuana, and other narcotics? Swamiji, I consider LSD to be an intoxicant. I don't allow any one of my students to use that or any intoxicants. I train my students to raise early in the morning, to take bath early in the day, and to attend prayer meetings 3 times a day. Our sector is one of austerity. It is the science of God. Although Bhakti Vedanta Swami had found that reporters generally did not report his philosophy, he took the opportunity to preach Krishna consciousness. Even if the reporters did not want to delve into the philosophy, his follower did the big mistake of modern civilization. Swamiji continued is to encroach upon others' property as though it was one's own. It creates an unnatural disturbances. God is the ultimate proprietor of everything in the universe. When people know that the God is the ultimate proprietor, the best friend of all living entities, and the object of all offerings and sacrifices, then there will be peace. After the reporters left, Swamiji continued speaking to the young people in his room. Mukunda, who had allowed his hair and beard to grow, but who wore around his neck the strand of large red beads Swamiji had given him an initiation, introduced some of his friends and explained that they were all living together and that they wanted to help Swamiji present Krishna consciousness to the young people of San Francisco. Mukunda's wife Janki asked Swamiji about his plane ride. He said it had been pleasant, except for some pressure in his ear. The houses looked like matchbox, he said. With his thumb and forefinger, he indicated the size of matchbox. He leaned back against the wall and took off the garlands he had received that day, until only a beaded necklace, a common, inexpensive item, with small bell on it remained hanging around his neck. He held it, inspected the workmanship, and toyed with it. This is special, he said, looking up because it was made with devotion. He continued to pay attention to the necklace as if receiving it had been one of the most important events of the day. When Swamiji's lunch arrived, he distributed some to everyone, and then Ranachora efficiently, though tact- tactlessly, tactlessly asked everyone to leave and gave Swamiji a little time to eat and rest. Outside the apartment and in storefront below, the talk was of Swamiji. No one had been disappointed. Everything Mukunda had been telling them about him was true. They particularly enjoyed how he had talked about seeing everything that Krishna's viewpoint. The
Thank
night
you.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Harneet Mataji.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Dandavat Pranam. That night on television, Swamiji's arrival was covered on the 11 o'clock news, and the next day it appeared in the newspapers. The Examiner's story was on page 2. Swami invites the hippies, along with a photo of the temple filled with followers and some shots of Swamiji who looked very grave. Swamiji had Mukunda read the article aloud. San Francisco's largest paper, the Chronicle, also ran an article, Swami in Hippie Land. Holy man opens SF temple. The article began. A holy man from India, described by his friend and beat poet Allen Ginsberg as one of the most conservative leaders of his faith, launched a kind of evangelistic effort yesterday in the heart of San Francisco's hippie haven. Swamiji objected to being called conservative. He was indignant. Conservative? How's that? In respect to sex and drugs, Mukunda suggested. Of course, we are conservative in that sense, Swamiji said. That simply means we are following Shastra. We cannot depart from Bhagavad Gita, but conservative we are not. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was so strict that he would not even look on a woman, but we are accepting everyone into this movement, regardless of sex, caste, position, or whatever. Everyone is invited to come chant Hare Krishna. This is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's munificence, his liberality. No, we are not conservative. Bhaktivedanta Swami rose from bed and turned on the light. It was 1 a.m. Although the alarm had not sounded and no one had come to wake him, he had risen on his own. The apartment was cold and quiet. Wrapping his chadar around his shoulders, he sat quietly at his makeshift desk, a trunk filled with manuscripts, and in deep concentration chanted the Hare Krishna mantra on his beads. After an hour of chanting, Bhaktivedanta Swami turned to his right. Although 2 years had passed since he had published a book, the third and final volume of the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, he had daily been working, sometimes on his translation and commentary of the second canto, but mostly on Bhagavad Gita. In the 1940s in India, he had written an entire Bhagavad Gita translation and commentary, but his only copy had mysteriously disappeared. Then in 1965, after a few months in America, he had begun again, starting with the introduction, which he had composed in his room on 72nd Street in New York. Now thousands of manuscript pages filled his trunk, completing his Bhagavad Gita. If his New York disciple, Hayagriva, formerly an English professor, could edit it, and if some of the other disciples could get it published, that would be an important achievement. But publishing books in America seemed difficult, more difficult than in India. Even though in India he had been alone, he had managed to publish 3 volumes in 3 years. Here in America, he had many followers, but many followers meant increased responsibilities, and none of his followers as yet seemed seriously inclined to take up writing, editing, and dealing with American businessmen. Yet, despite the dim prospects for publishing this Bhagavad Gita, Bhaktivedanta Swami had begun translating another book, Charitamrita. the principal Vaishnava scripture on the life and teachings of Lord Chaitanya. Putting on his reading glasses, Swamiji opened his books and turned on the dictating machine. He studied the Bengali and Sanskrit texts, then picked up the microphone, flicked the switch to record. Flashing on a small red light, he began speaking. While the Lord was going, chanting, and dancing, he spoke no more than a phrase at a time, flicking the switch, pausing, and then dictating again. Thousands of people were following him, and some of them were laughing, some were dancing, and some singing. Some of them were falling on the ground, offering obeisances to the Lord. Speaking and pausing, clicking the switch on and off, he would sit straight and gently rocking and nodding his head as he urged forward his words, or he would bend low over his books, carefully studying them through his reading glasses.
Thank you, Mataji.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Leela Nandini.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, Dandat Pranam. An hour passed and Swamiji worked down. The building was dark except for Swamiji's lamp and quiet except for the sound of his voice and the click and hum of the dictating machine. He wore a faded peach turtleneck jersey beneath his grey wool chaddar, and since he had just risen from bed, his saffron dhoti was wrinkled. Without having washed his face or gone to the bathroom, he sat absorbed in his work. At least for this few rare hours, the street and the Radhakrishna temple were quiet. This situation at night, with the surroundings quiet, and him at his transcendental literary work was not much different from his early morning hours in his room at the Radha Damodara temple in Vrindavana, India. There, of course, he had no dictating machine, but he had worked during the same hours and from the same test Chaitanya Charitamrita. Once he had begun a verse, Prabhuji, uh, once he had begun a verse by verse translation with commentary, and another time he had written essays on the test. Now, having just arrived in this corner of the world, so remote from the scenes of Lord Chaitanya's pastimes, he was beginning the first chapter of a new English version of Chaitanya Charitamrita. He called it Teachings of Lord Chaitanya. He was following what had become a vital routine in his life, rising early and writing the Parampara message of Krishna consciousness, putting aside all other considerations disregarding present circumstances. He would merge into the timeless message of transcendental knowledge. This was his most important service to Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati. The thought of producing more books and distributing them widely inspired him to rise every night and translate. Bhaktivedanta Swami worked until dawn. Then he stopped and prepared himself to go down to the temple for the morning meeting. Though some of the New York disciples had objected, Swamiji was still scheduled for the mantra rock dance at the Evelyn Ballroom. It wasn't proper, they had said, for the devotees out in San Francisco to ask their spiritual master to go to such a place. It would mean amplified guitars, pounding drums, wide light shows, and hundreds of drugged hippies. How could his pure message be heard in such a place? But in San Francisco, Mukunda and others had been working on the mantra rock dance for months. It would draw thousands of young people, and the San Francisco Radhakrishna temple stood to make thousands of dollars. So, although among his New York disciples, Swamiji had expressed uncertainty, he now said nothing to deter the enthusiasm of his San Francisco followers. Sam Sipestra, Mukunda's friend and one of the Mantra Rock organizers, explained the idea to Haigriva, who had arrived from. Just please scroll down. Who had arrived from New York. There is a whole new school of in San Francisco music opening up. The Grateful Dead have already cut their first record. Their offer to do this dance is a great publicity boost just when we need it. But Swamiji says that even Ravi Shankar is Maya, Haigriva said. Oh, it is all been arranged, Sam assured him. All the bands will be on stage, and Allen Ginsberg will introduce Swamiji to San Francisco. Swamiji will talk and then chant Hare Krishna, with the bands joining in. Then he leaves. There would be around 4,000 people there. Bhakti Siddhanta Swami knew he would not compromise himself. He would go, chant, and then leave. The important thing was to spread the chanting of Hare Krishna. If thousands of young people gathering to if thousands of young people where do- if thousands of young people gathering to hear rock music could be engaged in hearing chanting the names of God, then what was the harm? As a preacher, Bhakti Siddhanta Swami was prepared to go anywhere to spread Sri Krishna consciousness. Since chanting Hare Krishna was absolute, one who heard or chanted the names of Krishna, anyone, anywhere, in any condition, could be saved from falling to the lower species in the next life. These young hippies wanted something spiritual, but they had no direction. They were confused, accepting hallucinations as spiritual visions, but they were seeking genuine spiritual life, just like many of the young people on the Lower East Side. Bhakti Siddhanta Swami decided he would go. His disciples wanted to go, and he was their servant and the servant of Lord Chaitanya.
Thank you.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Mukunda, Sam, and Harvey Cohen had already met with rock entrepreneur Chet M, who had agreed that they could use his Avalon ballroom and that if they could get the bands to come, everything above the cost for the groups, the security, and a few other basics would go as profit for the San Francisco Radha Krishna temple. Mukunda and Sam had then gone calling on the music groups, most of whom lived in the Bay Area. And one after another, the exciting new San Francisco rock bands, the Grateful Dead, Moby Grape, Big Brother, and the Holding Company, Jefferson Airplane, Quicksilver Messenger Service, had agreed to appear with Swami Bhaktivedanta for the minimum wage of $250 per group, and Allen Ginsberg had agreed. The lineup was complete. On the night of the mantra of dance, people lined up all the way down the street and around the block, waiting for tickets at $2.5 apiece. Attendance would be good, a capacity crowd, and most of the local luminaries were coming. LSD pioneer Timothy Leary arrived and was given a special seat on stage. Swami Kriyananda came carrying a tambura. A man wearing a top hat and a suit with a silk sash that said San Francisco arrived, claiming to be the mayor at the door. Claiming to the mayor. At the door, Mukunda stopped a respectably dressed young man who didn't have a ticket. And then someone tapped Mukunda on the shoulder. Let him in. It's all right. He's Osley. Mukunda apologized and submitted, allowing Augustus Osley, standing to folk hero and famous synthesizer of LSD, to enter without a ticket. Almost everyone who came wore bright or unusual costumes, tribal robes, Mexican ponchos, Indian kurtas, God's eyes, feathers, and beads. Some hippies brought their own flutes, lutes, gourds, drums, rattles, horns, and guitars. The Hells Angels, dirty-haired, wearing jeans, boots, and denim jackets, and accompanied by their women, made their entrance carrying chains, smoking cigarettes, and displaying the regalia of German helmets, emblazoned emblems, and so on. Everything but the motorcycles which they had parked outside. The devotees began a warm up kirtan on stage, dancing the way Swamiji had shown them. Incense poured from the stage and from the corners of the large ballroom. And although most in the audience were high on drugs, the atmosphere was calm. They had come seeking a spiritual experience. As the chanting began, very melodiously, some of the musicians took part by playing the instruments. The light show began, strobe lights flashed, colored balls bounced back and forth to the beat of the music. Large blobs of pulsing colors flirted across the floor, walls, and ceiling. A little after 8 o'clock, Moby Grape took the stage. With heavy electric guitars, electric bass, and two drummers, they launched into their first number. The loudspeaker shook the ballroom with their vibrations, and a roar of approval rose from the audience. Around 9:30, Swamiji left his Frederick Street apartment and got into the back seat of Harvey's Cadillac. He was dressed in his usual saffron robes, and around his neck he wore a garland of gardenias whose sweet aroma filled the car. On the way to the Avalon, he talked about the need to open more centers. At 10 o'clock, Swamiji walked up the stairs of the Avalon, followed by Kirtanananda and Ranuchod. As he entered the ballroom, devotees blew conches, someone began a drum roll, and the crowd parted down the center, all the way from the entrance to the stage, opening a path for him to walk. With his head held high, Swamiji seemed to float by as he walked through the strange milieu, making his way across the ballroom floor to the stage. Suddenly, the light show changed. Pictures of Krishna and his pastimes flashed onto the wall. Krishna and Arjuna riding together on Arjuna's chariot. Krishna eating butter. Krishna subduing the whirlwind demon. Krishna playing the flute. As Swamiji walked through the crowd, everyone stood, applauding and cheering. He climbed the stairs and seated himself softly on a waiting cushion. The crowd quieted. Gaurav Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhu Dandavat Pranam. Looking over at Ellen Ginsberg, Swamiji said, "You can speak something about the mantra." Ellen began to tell of his understanding and experience with the Hare Krishna mantra. He told how Bhaktivedanta Swami had opened a storefront on 2nd Avenue and had chanted Hare Krishna in Tom's Green Square Park. And he invited everyone to the Frederick Street Temple. "I especially recommend the early morning kirtans," he said, "for those who coming down from LSD want to stabilize their consciousness on re-entry." Swamiji spoke, giving a brief history of the mantra. When he looked over at Ellen again, "You may chant." Ellen began playing his harmonium and chanting into the microphone, singing the tune he had brought from India. Gradually, more and more people in the audience caught on and began chanting. As the kirtan continued and the audience got increasingly enthusiastic, musicians from the various bands came on stage to join in. Ranchor, a fair drummer, began playing Moby Grape's drums. Some of the bass and other guitar players joined in as the devotees, and a large group of hippies mounted the stage. The multicolored oil slicks pulsed, and the balls bounced back and forth to the beat of the mantra, now projected onto the wall. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. As chanting spread throughout the hall, some of the hippies got to their feet, held hands, and danced.
Thank you, Prabhu. Here,
Should I-
Hare Krishna Sri Pranams. Alan Ginsberg. We sang Hare Krishna all evening. It was absolutely great, an open thing. It was the height of the hate Ashbury spiritual enthusiasm. It was the first time that there had been a music scene in San Francisco where everybody could be a part of it and participate. Everybody could sing and dance rather than listen to other people sing and dance. Janaki. People didn't know what they were chanting for, but to see that many people chanting, even though most of them were intoxicated, makes Swamiji very happy. He laughed and see the people chanting. I agree. Standing in front of the bands, I could hardly hear, but above all, I could make out the chanting of Hare Krishna, building steadily. On the wall behind, the slide projected a huge picture of Krishna in a golden helmet with a peacock feather, a flute in his hand. Then Swamiji stood up, lifted his arms, and began to dance. He gestured for everyone to join in, and those who were still seated stood up and began dancing and chanting and swaying back and forth, following Swamiji's gentle dance. Roger Segre. The ballroom appeared as if it was a human field of wheat blowing in the wind. It produced a calm feeling in contrast to the usual Avalon ballroom atmosphere of carrying energies. The chanting of Hare Krishna continued for over an hour, and finally everyone was jumping and yelling, even crying and shouting. Someone placed a microphone before Swamiji, and his voice resounded strongly over the powerful sound system. The tempo quickened. Swamiji was perspiring profusely. Kirtanananda insisted that the kirtan stop. Swamiji was too old for this, he said. It might be harmful, but the chanting continued faster and faster until the words of the mantra finally became indistinguishable amidst the amplified music and the chorus of thousands of voices. Then suddenly it ended. and all that could be heard was the loud hum of the amplifiers and Swamiji's voice ringing out, offering obeisances to his spiritual master. Om Vishnupada Paramahamsa Parivrajacharya Ashtodar Shri Srimad Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. Swamiji made his way off stage through the heavy smoke and clouds and down the front stairs with Ketanananda and Ranachod close behind him. Alan announced the next rock group. As Swamiji left the ballroom and the appreciative crowd behind, he commented, "This is no place for a brahmachari." Some of Bhaktivedanta Swami's more thoughtful followers in San Francisco felt that certain candidates for initiation did not intend to fulfill the exclusive lifelong commitment a disciple owes to his guru. Swamiji, they would say, some of these people come only for the initiation. We have never seen them before, and we never see them again. Swamiji replied that was the risk he had to take. One day in a lecture in the temple, he explained that although the reaction for disciples' past sins are removed at initiation, the special master remains responsible until the disciple is delivered from the material world. Therefore, he said, Lord Chaitanya warned that the Guru should not accept many disciples. One night in the temple during the question and answer session, a pet bearded fellow raised his hand and asked Swamiji, "Can I become initiated?" The brash public requested annoyed some of Swamiji's followers, but Swamiji was civil. "Yes," he replied, "but first you must answer two questions. Who is Krishna?" The boy thought for a moment and said, "Krishna is God." "Yes," Swamiji replied. "And who are you?" Again the boy thought for a few moments and then replied, "I am the servant of God." "Very good," Swamiji said then. "Yes, you can be initiated tomorrow."
Thank
Bhaktivedanta.
you.
Thank you, Guru Hare Krishna.
Neha Mataji.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Bhaktivedanta Swami knew that it would be difficult for his Western disciples to stick to Krishna consciousness. Am I audible, Prabhuji?
Yes, Mataji.
Bhaktivedanta Swami knew that it would be difficult for his Western disciples to stick to Krishna consciousness and attain the goal of pure devotional service. All their lives, they had had the worst of training, and despite their nominal Christianity and philosophical searching, most of them knew nothing of the science of God. They did not even know that illicit sex and meat eating were wrong, although when he told them, they accepted what he said and they freely chanted Hare Krishna. So, how could he refuse them? Of course, whether they would be able to persevere in Krishna consciousness despite the ever present attractions of Maya would be seen in time. Some would fall, that was the human tendency, but some would not. At least those who sincerely followed his instructions to chant Hare Krishna and avoid sinful activities would be successful. Swamiji gave the example that a person could say that today's fresh food, if not properly used, would spoil in a few days. But if it is fresh now, to say that in the future it will be misused and therefore spoil is only a surmise. Yes, in the future anyone could fall down. But Bhaktivedanta Swami took it as his responsibility to engage his disciples now. And he was giving them the methods which, if followed, would protect them from ever falling down. Prabhuji, could you please scroll? Aside from Vedic standards, even by the standard of Swamiji's New York disciples, the devotees in San Francisco were not very strict. Some continued going to the donut shop, eating food without offering it to Krishna, and eating forbidden things like chocolate and commercial ice cream. Some even indulged in after Kirtana cigarette breaks right outside the temple door. Some got initiated without knowing precisely what they had agreed to practice. Kirtanananda said, the mood in San Francisco was a lot more relaxed. The devotees liked to go to the corner and have their coffee and donuts. But Swamiji loved the way so many people were coming, and he loved the program at the Avalon Ballroom. But there were two sides: those who strictly followed the rules and regulations and emphasized purity, and then those who were not so concerned about strictness but who wanted to spread Krishna consciousness as widely as possible. Swamiji was so great that he embraced both the groups. The morning and evening kirtanas had already made the Radha Krishna temple popular in Hyatt Ashbury, but when the devotees began serving a daily free lunch, the temple became an integral part of the community. Swamiji told his disciples simply to cook and distribute prasadam. That would be their only activity during the day. In the morning, they would cook, and at noon, they would feed everyone who came. Sometimes 150 to 200 hippies from the streets of Hyatt Ashbury. Before the morning kirtana, the girls would put oatmeal on the stove, and by breakfast, there would be a room full of hippies, most of whom had been up all night. The cereal and fruit was for some the first solid food in days.
Thank you,
But
Niham.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. But the main program was the lunch. Mahathi would go out and shop, getting donations whenever possible for whole wheat flour, garbanzo flour, split peas, rice, and whatever vegetables were cheap or free. Potatoes, carrots, turnips, rutabagas, beets. Then every day the cooks would prepare spiced mashed potatoes, buttered chapatis, split pea dal, and a vegetable dish for 200 people. The lunch program was possible because many merchants were willing to donate to the recognized cause of feeding hippies. Harsharani. The lunch program attracted a lot of the hippie hill crowd who obviously wanted food. They were really hungry. And there were other people who would come also, people who were working with the temple but were initiated. The record player would be playing the record Swamiji had made with his disciples in New York. It was a nice family atmosphere. Haridas. It was taken outside too, outside the front, but the main food was served inside. It was amazing. The people would just sit all huddled together and we would really line them wall to wall. A lot of them would simply eat and leave. Other stores along High Territory were selling everything from beads to rock records. But our store was different because we were not selling anything, we were giving it away. And we were welcoming everybody. We were providing a kind of refuge from the tumult and madness of the scene. So it was in that sense a hospital, and I think a lot of people were helped and maybe even saved. I don't mean only their souls, I mean their minds and bodies were saved because of what was going on in the streets and that they just simply couldn't handle. I'm talking about overdoses of drugs, people who were plain lost and needed comforting, and who sort of wandered or staggered into the temple. Some of them stayed and became devotees, and some just took prasadam and left. Daily, we had unusual incidents, and Swamiji witnessed it and took part in it. The lunch program was his idea. Paramkanti Mataji.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Danvat Pranam. Those who are more interested and had questions, the spiritual seekers would visit Swamiji in his room. Many of them would come in complete anxiety over the war in Vietnam or whatever was going on, trouble with the law, bad experiences on drugs, or falling out with school or family. There was much public concern about the huge influx of youth in San Francisco, a situation that was creating an almost uncontrollable social problem. Police and social welfare workers were worried about. Prabhuji, please could you scroll? Health problems and poor living conditions, especially in Haight-Ashbury. Some middle-class people feared a complete hippie takeover. The local authorities welcomed the service offered by Swami Bhaktivedanta's temple, and when civic leaders in Haight-Ashbury talked of forming a council to deal with the crisis, they requested Swami Bhaktivedanta to take part. Michael Bowen, Bhaktivedanta had an amazing ability through devotion to get people off drugs, especially speed, heroin, burned out, LSD cases, all of that. Haridas. The police used to come with their paddy wagons through the park in the early hours of the morning and pick up runaway teenagers sleeping in the park. The police would round them up and tried to send them back home. The hippies needed all the help they could get, and they knew it. And the Radha Krishna temple was certainly a kind of spiritual haven. Kids sensed it. They were running, living on the streets, no place where they could go. Where? Prabhuji, please, can you scroll? They could rest, where people weren't going to hurt them. A lot of kids would literally fall into the temple. I think it saved a lot of lives. There might have been a lot more casualties if it hadn't been for Hare Krishna. It was like opening a temple in a battlefield. It was the hardest place to do it, but it was the place where it was most needed. Although the Swami had no precedents for dealing wonderful, it worked. As Allen Ginsberg had advised 5,000 hippies at the Avalon, the early morning kirtan at the temple provided a vital community service for those who were coming down from LSD and wanted to stabilize their consciousness on Braintree. Allen himself sometimes dropped by in the morning with acquaintances with whom he had stayed up all night. But on occasion, the re-entries would come flying in out of control for crash landings in the middle of the night. One morning at 2 a.m., the boys sleeping in the storefront were awakened by a pounding at the door, screaming, and the police lights. When they opened the door, a young hippie with wild red hair and beard plunged in, crying, "Oh Krishna, Krishna, oh help me, oh don't let them get me, oh for God's sake, help." A policeman stuck his head in the door and smiled. "We decided to bring him by here," and he said, "because we thought maybe you guys could help him. I am not comfortable in this body," the boy screamed as the policeman shut the door. The boy began chanting furiously and turned white, sweating profusely in terror. Swamiji's boy spent the rest of the early morning consoling him and chanting with him until the Swami came down for kirtan and class. The devotees often sent distressed young people to Swamiji with their problems, and they allowed almost anyone to see Swamiji and take up his valuable time. While walking around San Francisco, Ravindra Swarup once met a man who claimed to have seen people from Mars in his tent when he had been stationed in Vietnam. The man, who had just been discharged from an army hospital, said that the Martians had talked to him. Ravindra Swarup told him about Swamiji's book, Easy Journey to Other Planets, which verified the idea of life on other planets. And he suggested that the Swami could probably tell him more about the people from Mars. So the man visited the Swami up in his apartment. "Yes, Swamiji answered, there are Martians."
Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Srila Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, Dandavat Pranams. Gradually, Swamiji's followers became more considerate of their spiritual master. Prabhu, am I audible? Hare Krishna Prabhu, am I audible?
Yes, Prabhu, you don't have to ask that question. Please read.
Okay. Swamiji's followers became more considerate of their spiritual master and began protecting him from persons they thought might be undesirable. One such undesirable was Rabbit, perhaps the dirtiest hippie in Haight-Ashbury. Rabbit's hair was always disheveled, dirty, and even filled with lice. His clothes were ragged and filthy, and his dirt-caked body stank. He wanted to meet the Swami, but the devotees refused, not wanting to defile Swamiji's room with Rabbit's nasty, stinking presence. One night after the lecture, however, Rabbit waited outside the temple door. As Swamiji approached, Rabbit asked, "May I come up and see you?" Swamiji agreed. As for challengers, almost every night someone would come to argue with Swamiji. One man came regularly with prepared arguments from a philosophy book from which he would read aloud. Swamiji would defeat them and the man would go home, prepare another argument, and come back again with his book. One night, After the man had presented his challenge, Swamiji simply looked at him without bothering to reply. Swamiji's neglect was another defeat for the man who got up and left. Israel, like Rabbit, was another well-known Ashbury character. He had a long ponytail and often played the trumpet during Kirtan. After one of Swamiji's evening lectures, Israel challenged, "This chanting may be nice, but what will it do for the world? What will it do for humanity?" Swamiji replied, "Are you not in the world? If you like it, why will others not like it? So you chant loudly." A mustached man standing at the back of the room asked, "Are you Allen Ginsberg's guru?" Many of the devotees knew that the question was loaded and that to answer either yes or no would be difficult. Swamiji replied, "I am nobody's guru, I am everybody's servant." To the devotees, the whole exchange became transcendental due to Swamiji's reply. Swamiji had not simply given a clever response, he had answered out of a deep, natural humility. One morning, a couple attended the lecture, a woman carrying a child and a man wearing a backpack. During the question and answer period, the man asked, "What about my mind?" Swamiji gave him philosophical replies, but the man kept repeating, "What about my mind? What about my mind?" With a pleading, compassionate look, Swamiji said, "I have no other medicine. Please chant this Hare Krishna. I have no other explanation. I have no other answer." But the man kept talking about his mind. Finally, one of the women devotees interrupted and said, "Just do what he says. Just try it." And Swamiji picked up his kartalas and began kirtan. One evening, a boy burst into a lecture exclaiming that a riot was gathering on High Street. The Swami should come immediately, address the crowd, and calm everyone down. Mukunda explained that it wasn't necessary for Swamiji to go, others could help. The boy just stared at Swamiji as if giving an ultimatum. Unless Swamiji came immediately, there would be a riot, and Swamiji would be to blame. Swamiji spoke as if preparing to do what the boy wanted. "Yes, I am prepared," but nobody went, and there was no riot.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you.
Varshana Leela.
Hare Krishna. Usually during the kirtan, at least one dancer would carry on in a narcissistic, egoistic way, occasionally becoming lewd to the point where Swamiji would ask the person to stop. One evening before Swamiji had come down from his apartment, a girl in a mini skirt began writhing, gyrating in the temple during kirtana. When one of the devotees went upstairs and told Swamiji, he replied, "That's all right. Let her use her energy for Krishna. I am coming soon and I will see for myself." When Swamiji arrived and started another kirtan, the girl, who was very skinny, again began to wriggle and gyrate. Swamiji opened his eyes and saw her. He frowned and glanced at some of his disciples, indicating his displeasure. Taking the girl aside, one of the women escorted her out. A few minutes later, the girl returned, wearing slacks and dancing in more reserved style. Swamiji was sitting on his dais, lecturing to a full house, when a fat girl who had been sitting on the window seat suddenly stood up and began hollering at him. "Are you just going to sit there?" she yelled. "What are you going to do now? Come on, aren't you going to say something? What are you going to do? Who are you?" Her action was so sudden and her speech so violent that no one in the temple responded. Unangered, Swamiji sat very quietly. He appeared hurt. Only the devotee sitting closest to him heard him say softly, as if to himself, "It is the darkest of the darkness." Another night, while Swamiji was lecturing, a boy came up and sat on the dais beside him. The boy faced out toward the audience and interrupted Swamiji. "I would like to say something now," Swamiji politely said. "Wait until after the class, then we have questions." The boy waited for a few minutes, still sitting on the dais, and Swamiji continued to lecture. But again the boy interrupted. "I got something to say. I want to say what I have to say now." The devotees in the audience looked up, astonished, thinking that Swamiji would handle the matter, and not wanting to cause a disturbance. None of them did anything. They simply sat while the boy began talking incoherently. Then Swamiji picked up his kartals. "All right, let us have kirtan." The boy sat in the same place throughout the kirtan, looking crazily, sometimes menacingly at Swamiji. After half an hour, the kirtan stopped. Swamiji cut an apple into small pieces
as was his custom. He then placed the paring knife and a piece of apple in his right hand and held his hand out to the boy. The boy looked at Swamiji, then down at the apple and the knife. The room became silent. Swamiji sat motionless, smiling slightly at the boy. After a long, tense moment, the boy reached out. A sigh rose from the audience as the boy chose the piece of apple from Swamiji's open hand. Haridasa, I used to watch how Swamiji would handle things. It wasn't easy. To me, that was a real test of his powers and understanding. How to handle these people, not alienate or antagonize or stir them up to create more trouble. He would turn their energy so that before they knew it, they were calm, like when you pat a baby and it stops crying. Swamiji had a way of doing that with words, with the intonation of his voice, with his patience to let them carry on for a certain period of time, let them work it out, act it out even. I guess he realized that the devotees just couldn't say, listen, when you come to the temple, you can't behave this way. It was a delicate situation. Often, sometimes, would say, I am God. They would get an insight or hallucination from their drugs. They would try to steal the spotlight. They wanted to be heard, and you could feel an anger against the Swami from the people like that. Sometimes they would speak inspired and poetic for a while, but they couldn't sustain it, and their speech would become gibberish. And the Swami was not one to simply pacify people. He wasn't going to coddle them. He would say, what do you mean? If you are God, then you have to be all knowing. You have to be the attributes of the God. Are you omniscient or omnipotent? He would then name all the characteristics that one would have to be an avatara to be God. He would rationally prove the person wrong. He had superior knowledge and he would rationally explain to them, if you are God, can you do this? Do you have this power?
Thank
Sometimes
you.
people.
Thank you. Please.
Hare Krishna.
Honey, Mataji. Are you there?
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Pranam. Sometimes people would take it as a challenge and would try to have a verbal battle with the Swami. The audience's attention would then swing to the disturbing individual, the person who was grabbing the spotlight. Sometimes it was very difficult. I used to sit there and wonder, how is he going to handle this guy? This one is really a problem. But Swamiji was hard to defeat. Even if he couldn't convince the person, he convinced the other people in the crowd so that the energy of the room would change and would tend to quiet the person. Swamiji would win the audience by showing them that this person didn't know what he was talking about. But the person would feel the vibrations of the room change, that the audience was no longer listening or believing his spell, and so the person would shut up. So Swamiji would remove the audience rather than the person. He would do it without crushing the person. He would do it by superior intelligence and also with a lot of compassion. When I saw him do these things, then I realized he was a great teacher, a great human being. He had the sensitivity not to injure a person physically or emotionally, so that when the person sat down and shut up, he wouldn't be doing it in defeat or anger. He wouldn't be hurt. He would just be outwitted by the Swami. We shall go for a walk at 6:30, Swamiji said one morning. You can drive me to the park. Several devotees accompanied him to Golden Gate Park's Stowaway Lake. They knew the park well and led Swamiji on a scenic walk around the lake, over a bridge, through forest enclosed paths, and across a small rivulet, hoping to please him with nature's beauty. Whatever Swamiji saw, he saw through the eyes of scripture, and his comments on most ordinary things were full of transcendental instruction. As he walked, he reflected aloud. Those who want to see God must first have the qualifications to see God. They must be purified, just like the cloud is now covering the sun. They say, oh, the sun is not out, but the sun is there. Only our eyes are covered. Like tour guides, the boys led the Swami to the more picturesque areas. They came upon swans gliding on the lake. Srimad Bhagavatam, Swamiji said, compares devotees to swans, and literature talks about Lord Krishna to beautiful, clear lakes. The non-devotees, he said, were like crows attracted by the rubbish of mundane topics. Walking over a gravel path, he stopped and drew their attention. Look at the pebbles. As many pebbles are there are that many living entities. The
Thank you.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna. So we'll stop here, page number 182. We'll continue the reading in the next class. All right, see you in the next class. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna, Krishna Prabhupada.